Hello, welcome to Happy Times and Places, a podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, endeavour to be interesting whilst remaining positive about a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine. My task is to comment and drop in observations and facts and guess what my special guest's favourite thing about each instalment might be.
Hi, my name's Dom Woodward. I'm a comedian, a magician, an actor and a Doctor Who fan. The story I've chosen to talk about is Death to the Daleks.
Well, hello everybody. The power is back on for this series of podcasts about Death to the Daleks. Nice to hear my friend Dominic Woodward, and I can see him because there's a video there, and I will work out a way to enable you to see the videos. I do occasionally have a spurt of posting them up on the Patreon feed, but I'll get them all up on YouTube at some point as well. A reminder that these podcasts are now available on YouTube just as audio only, but it's another way of getting them out there. I'm grateful, of course, if you can tell your friends all about them, but what you need to tell them about right now is that Death to the Daleks, Episode 1, has proved certainly more popular with my correspondents than I'd anticipated. Well, not necessarily anticipated, because I'd enjoyed watching it, and I kind of knew I would, because the previous go I'd had at watching Death to the Daleks, I'd been very pleasantly surprised by how gripping and interesting I found Episode 1. Normally the thing I will kind of want to skip to get to the meat of a story. But the various people who've been watching along or listened to the commentary and re-engaged with Death to the Daleks have said things like Anthony Carroll's observation that it's a great first episode, very atmospheric, don't mess with Sarah. James Gould says... James Gould's talking about... both James Gould and Gareth Mowley are talking about I invoked Trial of a Time Lord and suggesting whether I should do that in one big run. James thinks it would bring something a bit different from usual. An extended run of stories might bring some new observations, whereas Gareth Bowley is intrigued because he's one of the guests. He's the person who's recorded a contribution for the Mysterious Planet segment. Back to Death to the Daleks, Keith Say says, the first story I saw as a very wee kiddie on first broadcast, and that made me a fan. Well, I might have watched it, Keith, but I would have been a mere 3 months old, because so a babe in arms. But maybe those arms were attached to a torso that was holding up a head that was watching, that contained some eyes that were watching this story. Who knows? I suspect not, but I cannot prove otherwise, so part of me harbours the hope that was the case. Steve White says, this story is another fond memory of mine. I remember it so clearly from its first transmission in 1974. Another story in the fantastic Season 11 that cemented my fandom at the tender age of 3. You had the wonderful Bilal, spoilers, we haven't got there yet, and the Exelons, the scary city route, and the various exploding Daleks that are peppered throughout the story. What more could a 3-year-old want? It didn't disappoint when the VHS was released in 1987 either, just a couple of weeks after I'd left school and started an apprenticeship, so I luckily had the readies available to pick up a copy from HMV in Southampton. It was the first new budget VHS release at $9.99. Oh yes, I remember. And then you have probably the best Target book cover as well, indeed. Depending on the day or the week and which way the wind is blowing, this is probably my favourite story of Season 11. You will never take that away from the Time Warrior for me. And then it's open season. I mean, my head says Invasion of the Dinosaurs, but that's because I like championing an underdog, and Invasion of the Dinosaurs was always, held up as the big failure of the Pertwee season, and I think it's been reevaluated since. And I've always gone the other way with the once very lauded Planet of the Spiders. I always found that hugely disappointing, and would be thumbs down on that. Now, both I think have levelled out slightly, in that I don't think. I think it's acknowledged that Planet of the Spiders has a lot of disappointing elements to it, that it doesn't no longer gets a pass just for being the regeneration story and the culmination of the era. And Invasion of the Dinosaurs, a lot of people now look past the dinosaur effects and think that it's a pretty good story. So yeah, but also now that people have started acknowledging Invasion of the Dinosaurs as a good story, then people say, oh yeah, but there are flaws with the story, like this, that, and the other. So yeah, I think things have settled down on both ends. I would definitely always, I think, though, and maybe that's just because it's embedded in me, have Invasion much higher than Planet of the Spiders. And Monster of Peladon is a tricky number, shall we say. It just doesn't seem to quite hold together as well as anything else really in the season, or indeed in the era. It's not a hugely successful retread of a much leaner and more beloved story, The Curse of Peladon. So Death could be way up there for me. It certainly never used to be. I would definitely have had Dinosaurs above it. And then my number 3 would be a three-way battle, really, between Death, Monster, and Spiders, none of which I would have been particularly, in massive favour of. However, Death, the last time I watched it, I thoroughly enjoyed, and so I'm in the mood to be positive that Death might very much be there at number 3 or even number 2. Who knows? Because I've got Dinosaurs to look forward to on this podcast at some point. I have Monster of Peladon too, and who knows? I may find that has hidden depths. Trevor Smith, having listened to part 1, said, bloody loved that, Toby, and as I've said many times, Pertwee was my Doctor, and this is top stuff. The Doctor and Sarah Jane going on holiday, the TARDIS running out of power, Sarah Jane in a swimsuit. That really grabbed my 13-year-old attention. Strange smoke-filled planet, weird creatures, and then bloody Daleks. What more do you need? Already looking forward to part 2? Well, here it is, Trevor, and you're in it. Happy memories of watching it on a chilly winter Saturday night. I love all this nostalgia for Death to the Daleks. I'm a big fan of Death to the Daleks, says Gavin Ware. I read the Target book when I was young and loved the story. It was an early entry in my VHS collection. I'd watch it over and over again. I really enjoyed all the challenges in the city, even the tiled floor, which of course wasn't a cliffhanger on the VHS. Oh, spoilers. And really liked the figure watching as the Doctor and Bilal made their way to the control centre. I'm a big fan of Michael Brandt's direction on all his episodes. He thought about things and came up with ideas. Some worked and maybe some didn't always come off as envisaged. String vests for Sea Devils. I like the string vests, But he made an effort to make the script come alive rather than just accept the scripts or design as they were presented to him. Looking forward to the rest of this one. Oh, well, again, here it is, Gavin. David Spofford says this is a moment to share my insanity. Oh, buckle in, folks. A few years ago, I started a Doctor Who commentary marathon. Starting with Unearthly Child, I'd watch every episode with the commentary, including all the Phantom Who Talk releases, cutaway comics, bonus CDs, and Happy Times and Places, which I do trim and paste into my iTunes rip of every episode as an alternate soundtrack. David, I wouldn't even know how to do that, so I'm very impressed. It's a bit of a quantum leap feeling, jumping back and forth across the last several years of your life, Toby, listening to your commentaries in episode order rather than release order. And listening to the DVD commentaries in episode order can sometimes be wearisome too. How many times can you listen to the anecdote about the Pertwee bouffon? But the reason I'm writing now is that suddenly everything is lining up. My marathon is currently halfway through Invasion of the Dinosaurs, so I'll soon be listening to an instalment of Happy Times and Places in real time. Well, and also I'm on the DVD commentary of this, David, so if you'll have to listen to me twice. But there I am obviously objective. And Paul says, I love Death to the Daleks. I do love your insanity, by the way, David, and that very much appeals to the part of my brain that wants everything to be organised, but I simply don't have the time or the aptitude to be as tidy as you have been and get everything in one place. I'd love to be able to. Paul, I love Death to the Daleks. I know objectively that it's not very good, but it was my first and for a long while my only VHS, bought by my uncle for Christmas one year. I watched it to death. I know every beat of the story. It was so exciting seeing a Pertwee that wasn't the Three Doctors or Carnival of Monsters, which had of course been repeated on the Five Faces of Doctor Who. I even love the music, though I suspect I'm alone in this. Alex Kapajoglu says, well, I mean, I don't dislike the music, Paul, but I do think the Dalek theme is taking avant-garde a little too far. And I suspect you're not alone, because everyone has bits that they love. Alex Kapajoglu says, Death to the Daleks was the first VHS I actually bought. There's a common thread running through this. And isn't it funny how the buying of merchandise is now actually part of our fan journey, whereas at the time it just seemed to be, well, something that one would do, but actually it's a focal point and a shared experience. And because the VHSs came out at a particular time, now some of you would have picked them up at junk shops later, but for a vast swathe of fans, you will have all got it at pretty much the same time. I didn't. I had to be very choosy with the ones I got, and in fact, when Death came out on VHS, I did not have a VHS player, so actually the stories coming out on VHS, it was rather moot because we didn't have a machine. Death to the Daleks was the first VHS I actually bought. Well, joint first. I bought it with the Seeds of Death. No, that's a point, because I got the Seeds of Death, but maybe it had already been out. I think the Seeds of Death had been out for a bit. But yeah, the first thing I did pretty much when I got a video was request a Doctor Who video for Christmas. It was my Christmas present. 1987, I think it was, Woolworths in Norwich. Even though I was more of a Pertwee fan, I remember enjoying the Seeds of Death better, perhaps because of the expectation thing. I expected to enjoy the Sarah Jane Dalek colour story, but preferred the black and white one. Interesting. Yeah, it's all expectations, either lived up to or confounded. It all sort of colours our particular bespoke experience of a programme, and nobody can ever take that away or ever quite erase that aspect of our viewing experience, which is what's so fascinating, And some people will have come across this at a particular time in their lives, and that particular conjunction of instances and influences and experiences will have had an impact on how that story is received, and that first reception is never fully taken away. I don't think on rewatches. All rewatches are kind of informed by that. Paul Gibbons, great choice. I love Death to the Daleks. Smiley face. It's shorter to the point, Paul. I like it. David Gillespie Pratt, excellent. I hope your train ride isn't too disrupted by the weather. Yes, because as I record this, have been coming back from somewhere 5 hours away from where I currently am. I returned yesterday from filming a Doctor Who Blu-ray extra, but more of that some other time. And Frank Shale says, first story I remember watching. Sarah's very good in this one. Well, let's see. And I have to be careful not to do things like taking Sarah for granted, because I do love her so, so that's a reminder to myself as we go into episode 2 of Death to the Daleks. Dominic made his choice of the TARDIS losing its power in episode 1, and I chose the very fleeting shots, or the clever camouflaging and brilliantly inventive shooting of the Exelons by director Michael Bryant in part 1. Our mission that we've chosen to accept is to crash land into Death to the Daleks and choose our favourite things about each episode, and then a bonus thing. And I will win if my choices tally more often than not with Dominic's. So I've not started well, but well, let's see how we do battle with only limited resources and no modern technology. Imagine, if I had to watch this on an abacus or something, because I wasn't allowed to use computers because the power had been drained. But that is not the case. I'm in a cupboard with a laptop and BBC iPlayer, and I am going to press play on episode 2 of Death to the Daleks in 3, 2, 1. How funny. Stop if you're playing, but I'm going to talk over this because my iPlayer has a weird thing where just as I've got everything set up and all ready to do, sometimes iPlayer plays at sort of like slightly half the speed. And it is a bit like it's been drained by the power of the Exelons. And I could tell as soon as it starts because it's a slight... and I could sort of slightly get away with it. But no, and now the sound's gone out of sync. So even in my cupboard here in Manchester, I am not immune to the power-draining force of the Exelons, although also I'm afraid it happened with the Sensorites as well when I did that. But so I'm going to have to restart to do that character. I'm gonna leave that bit in because it seemed a bit of an appropriate failure of technology, and I quite like it when things go wrong. To err is human. Well, to err is actually largely modern technology, but humans seem to pay the price. This human particularly. So I'm going to just John Pittman is suddenly talking like this. So I'm gonna pause briefly and sort that out. Probably turn everything off and turn it back on again. And but for you, I will return imminently. See, it took me no time. It took me a while actually. It wasn't straightforward. Should I talk you through it? Thought, I'll just call it up on Google Chrome, a different search engine. That'll sort it out because I'm not signed in there. So I had to look in my passwords for my iPlayer password. They're not in there either. So I had to go to my little place where I keep them. But then for some reason, my keyboard didn't work on that. See, you don't... and so I had to shut that down and start again. So you don't need a malign, sackclothed alien interference in order to lose all the resources available to you via the miracles of modern technology. It just doesn't really work properly. Now, I'm aware that the technology at my fingertips now, compared to that was available to the people who made this program, is, probably impossible for them to conceive. But nonetheless, it doesn't make us any happier. It's no less frustrating. So anyway, that little segue into an illustration of why access to all things technological is not perhaps as marvelous as this story might have us think, is nonetheless over, and so we are now more stereo than analog, which will make the next 25 minutes hopefully more sophisticated than had I recorded this on a wind turbine powered cassette recorder. So let's enter the digital age as I get those pixels dancing about on my computer screen from the iPlayer in the form of Death to the Daleks Part 2, which we will begin in 3, 2, 1. I thought when I invoked the episode number, when I said, whatever I said, did I say episode 1 or part 1? I can't even remember which I said. I'm not very good at... I think this will be a part rather than an episode, but I could be completely wrong. Is it by Terry Nation? Is it part 2? I'm sure there are some people out there who know. I know, obviously, the Ice Warriors is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but which are part and which are episodes, I would have to think about, and I would probably frequently get wrong. But it's something I maybe need to look at with the 70s and 80s stories of making sure I'm certain which are episodes and which are parts, because I think a proper nerk would be able to do that. So here we have the wheeze of Death to the Daleks, and it's that the Daleks are robbed of power, including that one in the background, who I think is an operator-free Dalek who is there to beef out the numbers. We have Michael Wisher voices, which are... I think these are okay. I remember not liking them massively in Frontier in Space, but these ones are okay. I mean, they're not the best, I don't think, the Michael Wisher ones, much as I love Michael Wisher. And John Abineri, who we will have to talk about fairly quickly, because he doesn't make it through this long. He does look, if you have a look at both of his sons, or his two that are actors, Daniel and Sebastian, they have that slight overbite that he has, and the sort of baggy underlids of the eyes. They look very like him, and certainly more so as they've got older. He acts with Sebastian in Secret Army and in an episode of Casualty. But looking at his career, it's he's I'm sure Michael Bryant told me that he was a bit rueful about getting this part in Death to the Daleks because he just reprised his role as Chingachgook in Hawkeye the Pathfinder, which he'd played and got an Emmy nomination for when he did it in Last of the Mohicans in 1971. But just after he gets his Emmy nomination, his next 2 films he's in, he's uncredited, and he does sort of pop up. He could be the guest star, the main guest actor in an episode of, say, Forever Green, and then that same year, have or around about that time, have 2 lines in something or just one scene or whatever. It's a real example of how an actor that you think of as being respected in the profession and that sort of thing, was prone to probably taking bits that were unsatisfying or and having periods where where you're having to just take what's available. And yeah, I think Michael Bryant said that he was a bit rueful, Labaneri, because he'd been playing Native American character, and it was all bows and arrows. That he gets this job in Doctor Who, and it's all bows and arrows. I do like the singing and the sort of slightly woozy atmosphere of the sacrifice chamber of the Exelons. Nice high shot here, and the camera creeping down. I mean, you've got to keep it quite tight because these sets haven't got an awful lot to play with. Although there's a nice depth to this one here, and that backdrop actually that gives a bit of height to this set is pretty good. But yeah, I think it's a good. It's a bit like the pitch of Doctor Who is standing on a landmine. What will he be able to do for the whole episode? That is a great pitch for Boom. To have we've got the Daleks, these deadly exterminated creatures. What happens if we remove their power? That's quite a good test of yourself as a writer to go. Okay, I'm going to take the usual strength that my creations have away from them, but they still have to be a deadly force. So I think there's something rather bold about that. So what's happened here? Oh, this is yes, Commander Stewart has been. It's a reminder that Commander Stewart has been nabbed. So Abernethy is, he's the commander, or the commander now that Commander Stewart has been incapacitated. So he looks like he's going to be your sort of main ally, and he's obviously, he's not been written or presented as somebody that is a minor character. So I think it's quite a good, and obviously us watching this, we think, well, it's the guy who was General Tarrington and Van Lutyens, and he's Herne the Hunter. We expect him to stick around. But even if you're not that sort of viewer, I think he's been presented as a fairly important character, and here he is, shot in the back by an arrow, which is pretty grim. And they look great, don't they, on the hilltop there? Oh, poor old Joy, Jill Tarrant, Joy Harrison. She's a very lovely woman. Yeah, you can't. I mean, look at that. That's really, and I think Abernethy said that in an interview, because he was one of the first to sort of very gamely do conventions and interviews, and he answered a letter to me as well. And I think he'd been filming a film called Death Train with Patrick Stewart and Pierce Brosnan, and Christopher Lee. But John Abernethy is dubbed in that by David DeKeyser. So now we have grumpy Duncan Lamont in charge, which is not such good news for Doctor Who, because he's already sort of displayed himself to be a bit of a wrong 'un. But yeah, I mean, Abernethy is probably in the story for about 20 minutes, which isn't good. But this is all great stuff. I mean, they're pinned down. The usual, and I think it's rather fun that the usual threat, the Daleks, are not the danger point here. It's it's these sort of silent analog aliens who don't have laser guns or anything, but arrows are pretty grim. And I think Abernethy said that he was pretty terrified when he was supposed to be lying there dead, and arrows were shot from a distance and land near him in shot, and it's not the cheat of having them sort of on a wire and sort of thwacked in. They were proper arrows fired by an Olympic expert. Here is, and it's an overword used, iconic, but I always think of this shot. It's in the middle of one of the Peter Haining books in one of the colour sections, and it kind of is clearly what inspired that amazing, again, iconic Target book cover, which is one of the greatest Target book covers of all time. Just a brilliant, rather than go, what characters from the story shall we use? It's kind of, we'll sum up the title in one stark image, which is an exploding Dalek dome, which is a great lure. I like that. It works on various different levels. And this is interesting, isn't it? That they've blown the Dalek up, and now they're sort of dancing around it in some sort of, is really disconcerting. And I know there's sort of elements of, it echoes the sort of dumb savage kind of trope that is a slightly difficult one, but in terms of this kind of story, which is not aiming for any particular comment, it's using various adventure story tropes of the time. And I think the Exelons, which because sometimes grunting monsters can be a bit laughable and a bit stupid, I think these are genuinely rather menacing, and the fact that one, they have arrows which are hard. I mean, they hurt and they thud, don't they? They make a whistling noise, and they're a pretty grim method of dispatch. Actually, there's actually something a bit scary about them, because they're hard and unpleasant. You can sort of feel them in a way that a laser death is a bit more abstract. Drugs in Doctor Who, yeah, they're getting Sarah high as a kite, and this is brilliantly woozily envisaged and portrayed by director Michael Bryant. Again, some fantastic lighting here, beautiful lighting, everybody, well done. And again, I often find sacrifice scenes and high priest stuff in Doctor Who is it's usually a little bit hammy and a little bit sometimes quite tedious and never particularly threatening, because it seems slightly sort of absurd. I think they've really thought about how they do this, and the casting of Mostyn Evans, who's somebody with a fine singing voice that they've then sort of sampled and used to evoke other noises that resound around the environment. I think makes the sacrifice lounge of the Exelons a really spooky environment, and you've got bits of handheld camera here and all that flurry there, and then the outer focus here, and Sarah huge in the foreground, and the camera pulling away. Not sure we've seen scenes depicted in this way in Doctor Who before, really, or ever. It's I think, again, Michael Bryant, hats off to you for doing, I think, such a splendid job there of making this distinctive, but also it uses its visuals not only to tell the story, but to evoke the atmosphere and the feeling and the effects of what is being done. And yeah, this is where the different factions start playing against each other. So Abernethy had to go, really, because he was clearly quite a reasonable and sensible chap. Whereas and there is some sympathy to be had for Galloway. We may not like the way that he talks, but his his motivation is pretty clear. I need to get this medicine back, and whoever stands in our way is not part of the bigger picture. Now, pragmatically, I think that's a reasonable position to take, especially as, the Doctor and Sarah are not friends of theirs and people they don't know, and it could even be from somewhere else. But Pertwee is not daft, and he's picked up on this, that, and it's very sweet of him to sort of say to Jill, better not chat to us, you might get tainted by the proximity. I've never really thought much about the cowled Exelons. I've always because they're not really my sorts of Doctor Who characters, because they don't have character. I prefer my aliens to have names and personalities and sort of chat to each other. But actually, I think, and because they don't have choreographers and things like that, it's often sort of walk-ons, shambling not very convincingly. They look like men in sacks. But actually, I think they work really well. You cannot not love the TARDIS model being shot. It's a thing of true beauty. I think that's rather joyful. Did they have a load lying around? Is it standard issue? Did they build one in order to destroy it? Who knows? Now we've got a bit of this studio stuff, haven't we? I haven't seen all the studio stuff of Death to the Daleks, but I've seen that because I think some of that was in 30 years, more than 30 years in the TARDIS. But it's certainly been used, round and about. But I don't think I've ever seen the full studio material that we have for Death, although I've also seen some of the CSO of the City being played around Sarah as well. So I've seen bits of it, but not all of it. Julian Fox has done a lot of work. He's popped up in more things that you would think. He pops up in Secret Army as well. He's of that generation of actors that were very good at playing sort of British officer types. And he joined us for the commentary. As I say, Joy Harrison. I've interviewed Joy 3 times because I did her twice on Skype. She did the first one, then she said she'd like to have another go at it, and so we did the second one, and then she was like, why don't we just, and then I think they decided to come over to England, and she said, why don't we just actually do it in person? So yeah, I've got 3 interviews with Joy. I remember thinking this was great in the book. I don't know why. It's one of those things. Terry Nation's very good at writing scenes that are fairly sort of, simplistic, and you sort of go, well, if he was really thought Galloway was a glory seeker, he wouldn't give this order just to Galloway. He'd tell Hamilton. But we can rationalise that. We can go, well, he's pretty done, but also he might think that even if Galloway's a wrong 'un, when you're given an order, people obey orders because they're serving officers, and that's how you do it. I like the fact he dies with his eyes and his mouth open. That's sort of pretty grown up. This is all, it is, again, fairly sort of simplistic Commando magazine sort of stuff, but I remember it really hitting home of him going, oh, great, we've got a voice of reason who, it's being commented upon, not just by the Doctor. People have noticed that Galloway is a bit of a problem, but the guy who's got the power to do anything about it tries to do something about it, but he only manages to do it to Galloway. And again, you can sort of say, well, he would have said it to Peter or Jill if he'd got the chance, but he never quite got the chance. This is horrible. This is like a massacre. Again, just there was some woozy stuff first, but this is pretty grim. As soon as that they're sort of, oh yes, and that now I've seen Michael Bryant do similar elsewhere, where somebody dies and slides down in the foreground while you've got action going on in the background. Michael Bryant, where have you been all my life? I mean, directing Doctor Who, and as I say, I've always thought he was a good director, and but have never put him on the list alongside Camfield and Ferguson. But actually, I think that's maybe familiarity breeding contempt. Well, and also, I mean, I've never been wild about Revenge of the Cybermen, Colony in Space. There's not an awful lot you can do with. My power problems. I've just had a thing pop up on my computer saying, "Oh, we're going to put you into low power mode," and I'm like, I've been plugged in for the whole thing. I haven't. The plug wasn't in the socket properly, so I've been operating on half power. Well, 20% power. It seems that the spirit of Death to the Daleks lives on in all of the electronic equipment in my house currently. This is beautifully lit as well. And it's, I mean, how quickly Galloway, goes, for the greater good that we're doing, let's organise people into work parties, which is really dodgy. Let's start enslaving people and sort of turning the indigenous population into chain gangs. I mean, it doesn't take and fortunately that these. I mean, I like it when the Daleks are cunning, but these ones have decided, they've waded up and sort of gone, yeah, we had a little chat with you, but now we've got machine guns. You just do as we tell you, or else. I like the fact that sometimes the Daleks don't actually bother. I do like the Whittaker cunning Daleks. They're rather good fun, but I also like the ones that don't even have time for that sort of guile, because they go, well, guile takes a bit of effort and a bit of calculation. When you're the superior force, you tell people what to do, and if they don't do it, you kill them. And that is all that, it's a different, and those two things are maybe incompatible or maybe not, but I like it when the Daleks are portrayed in either of those ways. They both have advantages and disadvantages, I suppose. But it's why the Daleks are great, and I actually quite like the sort of silvery livery that these ones have. Whereas he is I was listening to a podcast about aliens recently, and that key line in Aliens where Sigourney Weaver says to Paul Reiser, you don't, and I'll modify my language, you don't see them screwing each other over for a goddamn percentage. Maybe they are better than us, and there is a sort of purity to the Daleks in that they say this is what we want, whereas Galloway sort of presenting his pragmatism, if you like, for the greater good. He's going, well, we'll save millions of lives. What does it matter about these, to use his parlance, savages? And you go, so the things that we will do for what we see as the good, and so we're obviously not supposed to side with Galloway, but again, it's presented, his motives are presented as being fairly sound as far as he is concerned, and I think that's again, it's a bit sort of comic strippy what Nation does, but I kind of like that, and I think it certainly works within Doctor Who, which is a program that has to be child friendly. And as I say, a lot of the sort of character beats in this, I remember reading them as a kid and them feeling very sophisticated. The idea that Stewart said, I'm giving you my last order, and you go, yeah, okay, great. So they've noticed that he's a bad guy. And then Galloway does I didn't quite catch that, Commander, which is a lovely scene. It's a lovely moment dramatically, but also speaks to his character, and it shows why he's able to carry on doing what he does. Here we have another lovely shot of that. Now, I believe the Exelons were supposed to glow a bit more than they do here, and Michael Bryant had wanted that sort of front axial protection type of thing where you paint something a certain color and then you shine a light and it makes it glow in the dark a bit like the Green Death does, and it wasn't quite as effective on the Exelons as he'd hoped it would be. But the brief bits where you do see it, where it does work a little bit, I have to say, is rather fantastic. It's a shame it didn't have as much of the effect as he would like it to have done. But I appreciate the effort, and I'm appreciating the Exelons much more than I ever have before, which is rather fun. Because I suppose I half expected them to be. I think there was a bit, not impressive and not worth talking about, but there's clearly a lot of effort gone into, them beyond the cliche. I'm sure there's a bit here that with the Doctor and Sarah at some point when they hear a noise or whatever, that didn't make it into the BBC video. I'm pretty sure of that. There's odd occasions with the BBC video where we're suddenly missing a bit. But I'm not going to go into the reasons why or the exact bit because it's just a vague memory that's just popped into my head. There's clearly some poor Exelon who has to go with his cigarette lighter and light the candles in the tunnels every evening. But that's okay. I suppose they don't have channel Exelon. But this is all pretty atmospheric. I think these are pretty high-end tunnels. Again, we've got some nice lighting going on here, and Elizabeth Sladen is got a bit of glowy light there, and the look on the Exelon's face. It's Belial, isn't it? And here we have something that's often gets a lot of stick, which is the great worm of Exelon, the root, which I remember was written up as one of those things that was a disappointing effect, and I've always thought is pretty good. I mean, it's obvious how it's done with the fishing wire on the end picking it up, but nonetheless. So that's it for Neil Saylor, who was also in the Sea Devils, was a friend of Michael Bryant. So Commander Stewart and Captain Railton are both dead by the end of episode 2. Good Lord. Oh, and Psytown, the last of the Daleks, there, who did join us for the commentary, he passed away this year as well. He phoned me some time ago and said, you should come and do an interview and things. He'd not been very well and then was better, so he was replying to something I'd written him like a year before, but we were in the middle of a house move and very tired, and it was one I never picked up on, but picked up back on because but also Cy had been interviewed by many people, so I did I was happy that he'd gone on record, and whilst it would have been lovely to do, it was just I think I pretty much just stopped a run of several years of travelling around the place interviewing people, and I just but I had a lovely long chat with him, and he was a jolly and charming man, quite camp in the way that certain performers of that era excelled at being, that you don't see. It's a different kind of camp that you see now, and very comfortingly jolly and outgoing and charming, and one of those great contributors to the televisual landscape of the 70s. So and beyond. I saw him recently in the Happiness Patrol getting drowned by strawberry fondant surprise, and then miraculously being alive again in the final episode, presumably as his own twin brother, fondant free. So what am I going to... Well, as I say, I do remember those character beats that I think Nation puts in with great economy, and we may look at such characters now and think they're a bit sketched, but they all do their job. And Galloway's a bit annoying because he's such a block to our heroes getting what they want, but he is given plenty of sound reasoning behind his actions, and Duncan Lamont is good casting because he's sort of a bit rough-hewn, and and it's great to see him in Doctor Who because he's so good as far as we can tell in the Quatermass Experiment. He was British TV's first sci-fi monster, really, and he's so good in that lovely sort of golem-like physiognomy that he lends to the stricken Victor Caroon, our very own Alexandra Palace Frankenstein's monster. So it's nice to see him there, and great to see John Abineri. I love all that stuff with the arrows in the sand. All that location filming, I think, is rather good, and I think it was very tricky with the Daleks. And I think Michael Bryant stages all of that very well. I think the stuff with the arrows flying about, that scene where they're all pinned down and the arrows are flying about, and you feel one could embed itself in your arm or get you at any minute, I think is tip top, exciting, adventurous Doctor Who. I think again the Exelons are quite a scary presence, momentarily replacing the Daleks as the major threat, but it doesn't take the Daleks long to get their machine guns, and then they're right, now we're going to mow everybody down. And again, I think that sequence is really well portrayed, considering the space that Bryant has to deal with. I think he shoots it really imaginatively. And again, things like that character dying in the foreground and sort of sliding down the fence post while stuff happens behind is you can tell why he used that again. I think the Daleks' little toy TARDIS that they shoot to test their machine guns is terrific. So much going on there, but my favourite thing is the oozy woozy depiction of whatever the incense is doing to Sarah in those sacrifice scenes. Sacrifice scenes, as I say, are a bit of a cliche. They could be a bit boring. They're a bit standard sort of Doctor Who kind of sci-fi of this period fare. But I think Bryant comes in and goes, right, how can I make this stuff interesting? I think that the sort of almost handheld feel of some of the camera work and that Sarah being out of focus and then the camera pulling away and her being in focus but in the foreground and all that. I think that woozy sacrifice stuff, augmented of course by the brilliant echoing booming voice of Mostyn Evans that has then been treated and used as the sort of ambient sound of the sacrifice chamber. I think all of that is really terrific. There's a lot of thought gone into that. It's very unusual for Doctor Who, and I think I think it makes something a bit run-of-the-mill Doctor Who TV sci-fi fare into something rather special in a story that's not really about that stuff. It's about the Daleks and their loss of power. It's about how do the Doctor and these humans survive and get what they need before the Daleks are restored to their murderous selves, and the different dynamics there, and having to battle human duplicity or pragmatism, depending on what side you're on, from Galloway and his ideals. So that's the main thrust of it. But the decoration, the hundreds and thousands scattered on to give it a bit of a bit of texture and a bit of colour. And among those is that sort of sacrifice stuff. I think has been treated with as much respect as the sort of the main thrust of the story, and it's not my usual kind of thing that I would gravitate towards either, because I find, as I say, silent, uncharacterized monsters a bit sort of boring, and shambling men in sacks a bit boring. I like there to be sort of a bit more personality to my monsters, but actually it makes the Exelons work as these sort of strange, menacing, but not besavaged. They're obviously different rather than sort of stupid, if you like. And I think that's that's very effectively done. So yeah, I am going for the oozy woozy sacrifice scene stuff. I bet if Dominic does choose that, he's not going to put it in that way. But let's see where he goes.
From episode 2, my favourite thing is the character of Galloway, because he's so mean and ruthless, and as he becomes in cahoots with the Daleks when they get their power back, he acts as kind of a capo in a German prisoner of war camp, and I just think he's a wonderful character.
Ah, well, yes. I mean, we did talk about Galloway, but I like the way Dominic's put it there, and I did allude to that, didn't I? And the fact that he sort of suggests organising work gangs, and I don't think it's a facetious parallel that Dominic has drawn there, because Terry Nation is, big on his World War II, iconography, and and of course a lot of drama at that time. It seems extraordinary now that so much storytelling post World War II, was about various things that happened in what was a time that now we can barely conceive, for the inhumanity, particularly, of the Holocaust and the final solution and all of that. And yes, there were lots of stories about, heroism on the battlefield, but, it was all done with a backdrop that everybody knew about, of these terrible concentration camps and the and of treatment of the indigenous populations and certain groups, particularly groups that often seem to be targeted, and so to take the sort of aspects of daring do and battle is one thing, and self-sacrifice and scarred baddies and all those sorts of things, which again time has made us reassess slightly. But it's one thing to take stories from the field of battle and turn them into echo them in kitty time and stories, and that seems perfectly normal. But to then get into the sort of more complex morality of the of collaborators and whether underground resistance, what the morality is of blowing up something that might cause problem to the enemy, but also sacrifice innocent civilians as well, and all of that stuff comes in play when you're in the Second World War. So for all of Nation's often very straightforward characterization and moments, that the reason they hit home so well is because they are all embedded with quite complex truths, and one of his skills as a writer is he manages to pare those down to their essentials in order to do perhaps much less nuanced characterization and storytelling that we would do now, but they all have their basis in something of huge nuance. And as I say, a lot of that sort of stuff really did hit home to me as a kid and seemed very complex and very grown up. So the fact that he's sort of transited very complex and grown up ideas into something that is palatable for less sophisticated children of and of a later era, for whom World War II was evoked much more through storytelling. That's certainly how I accessed it than through the history books at that time. I think is really interesting, and I think it's one of his great strengths, considering, of course, the fire that he's playing with. If you think about the thing actually happened, and at that point, in relatively recent history. It's extraordinary. If you're not of my generation, it may seem quite strange just to what extent World War II formed so many films, TV series, and even ones that weren't set during that time, but the storytelling techniques that had been honed on stories depicting that time, played a major part in so much drama that was consumed by my generation. And people's textbooks at school, had swastikas drawn on them, not because the kids drawing the swastikas were Nazis or liked Nazis, but it was stuff that we knew about, that people saw, and part of the readings, are we the baddies, that the shapes of the Nazi, those Nazi designs are famous, aren't they, for being tight boots, high, black crosses, all this sort of thing, stuff that's really striking and designed to make the wearer feel powerful and cool. So it's amazing how so much of that stuff it wasn't unusual. I mean, we see it now with members of the royal family, and the opprobrium is poured upon them. But people would go to fancy dress parties, dressed as a Gestapo officer or whatever. And so, it's amazing now when we think of how much that stuff was sort of seeped in our popular culture, and I think we have a much more nuanced relationship with it now. And yet, how much of a right do we? Because actually, the people that were dealing with it then, that were people that had lived through that time and were processing it in their way. So it's very complicated. It's very complicated and interesting, and I don't have an answer, which is why I've just done a monologue that's gone all over the place. But I think it's fascinating to talk about this stuff. And yes, there is an element with Galloway. This is why I went in that direction, was because Dominic, pointed out that, Galloway is acting out of self-interest, but in so doing, he essentially becomes a collaborator, and not just one who's biding his time, waiting to get what he wants, but who is perfectly prepared to enact some terrible things to make sure that the trains run on time in order that he gets what he needs. Now, we know he's a fool, because there's no way that the Daleks are going to honour their deal with him, because we know how the Daleks are, and again they're pretty transparent. But as we can see from modern democracy, the people who have all the power can say and do some terrible things, and people that like the cut of their jib will kind of turn a blind eye to that, even if it's stuff that you think, but in the cold light of day, that's gonna blow back on you. But if the package is attractive enough, people seem to be happy to ignore that. So, Galloway might not seem as naive and one note, awkward as one might initially dismiss him as. And yeah, it's wonderful to see Duncan Lamont. I don't think I'd have chosen Galloway, because I do find him slightly too annoying. I've made all sorts of, I hope, interesting and sort of more than two points about him that make him slightly more than two-dimensional. But and of course he does do the thing later on that is the stuff of all good Doctor Who that we'll get to, his actions in episode 4. But he is a bit annoying, but then he's supposed to be annoying. I mean, that's the whole point. He is he is the fly in the Doctor's ointment. But so I probably wouldn't have chosen him, and partially because I don't think it's a part that you can, there's no. It's not a part you can enjoy. He's not a colourful villain that you can really enjoy playing, and he doesn't have a fantastic sense of humour. So, whilst Duncan Lamont doesn't do anything particularly wrong, I also don't think it's a standout part. Nobody in this is a stand, and I think that is maybe a problem with early Nation, is that there's some great actors in all of those Nation. Groups of humans / Thals stories where everyone goes off and has an adventure. Philip Bond in the Daleks, Bernard Horsfall and Tim Priest in Planet of the Daleks. You've got some good actors there, but they don't really get enough to write home about. They're helping. Make what's on the page work, rather than being given stuff that allows them to shine. And I don't think, and I think it's kind of the same here. Everyone's doing their job, but they're never going to do anything that's going to make them as memorable as the more memorable. Crucially, the real baddie characters that Nation writes, where he excels and gives actors the sort of stuff they like getting their teeth into. Marvick Chen, Nida, Davros, Travis. He's clearly good at those sorts of, which are again, the nasty, booable, hissable, Nazi type villains that he seems to have an awful lot of fun with, and that you can go further with the writing of. So I don't think he really massively helps the actors as much. So as I say, yeah, nobody's doing anything wrong, but there are more memorable characters and performances in Doctor Who. Everyone's, Lamont and Abineri do their job, and Julian Fox is good. I fear Joy is not great, but again, it's quite a limply written character. But yeah, the characters are maybe one of the areas where the story could do better. But then again, I do love the shock of Railton, who seems he has that nice bit where he sort of stands up to the Daleks a bit and is kind of, right, this is what we're going to do, and he looks like he's going to be, and he's sympathetic towards the Doctor's aims and needs, and then he's dead. I mean, 5 minutes into the episode, amazing. So that's a nice twist and a shock. So I'm glad Dominic chose Galloway and Duncan Lamont, but I don't think I'm not kicking myself because I don't think I would have gone there. And I do like the fact that I'm getting a lot of enjoyment out of an area I sort of rather neglected. In previous viewings and thoughts to myself about the story of the Exelons in part 1 and the Exelon involved sacrifice scenes in episode 2. What will it be for episode 3? So I've now got to get everything right from here on in order to win, but I suspect that's not going to happen. But let's see if I can get a consolation prize by being in accord with my good friend Dominic Woodward at some point in proceedings. But I'm not optimistic. I can feel the power draining from my optimism as I speak. Well, thanks ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Dominic Woodward, who can be found on Twitter at Dominic Woodward. He's a great comic. Avail yourself of him if you can. I'm grateful to Dominic and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Adam Parkin, not Parker as I said on the last episode's credits, sorry Adam, Ian Morgan, Nathan Moore, Stuart Mitchell, Russ McPhillips, Jason Mayo, David Matthewman, Steve Manfred, Gavin McLean, Lisa and Andrew, James Lark, Guy Lambert, Clive Lewis, Ashley Knight, Andy Kitching, Richard King Byatt, Jess Jerkovic, Christopher Joyce, Andrew Jordan, Paul Jones, Andrew Jolly, Robert Jewell, Richie Howarth, Dave Hoskin, Legion Henderson, Michael Harvey, Paul Gregory, Fraser Gregory, David Green, Lisa C. Greco, Paul Goodridge and Gary Gillett. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Well, if you'd like your name to be read out on the credits, correctly or not, then you can go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock. It's one of the perks of becoming a patron. It's a way of supporting these podcasts because they're part of what I do as my living now. I'm a comic and I write about Doctor Who and I research Doctor Who and I make documentaries about Doctor Who, and now these podcasts are part of that. So if you would like to enable me to spend more time doing them quicker and better and with better equipment and, less often when somebody's taken the dog for a walk and I've got a very short window in which to complete the post-credits bit, then you can do that. That's at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, well, you get 3 releases per week generally, plus pictures of my dog as a fourth one. That doesn't count amongst the 3, and you can see why, because it's just pictures of my dog. But some people seem to like them best. But anyway, for the serious scholars, digesters of podcastery and maybe videos and other bits and bobs. It's largely video and audio material. You tend to get 3 of those a week. Exclusives include a podcast called Far Too Much Information and monthly AMAs, which often come in 2 or 3 installments. And you're also early with Happy Times and Places, Too Much Information and Indefinable Magic. A couple of episodes ahead with the latter 2 generally, and Happy Times and Places a few months ahead. That's at patreon.com/Toby Haydock. Tiers go from £3 up to whatever you like, really. And there's also ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock, where you can just occasionally buy me a copy. It's like coffee. It's like giving me a sort of tip if you've particularly enjoyed a podcast. And what you can do if you are not in a position or of the inclination to do anything financially, and that's totally understandable. I am gratified and emboldened just by having listenership, because it means you're enjoying this stuff, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. But what you can do that costs you nothing but a little of your time is to go to iTunes in particular and give these a like and a subscribe and a 5-star review and a few lines saying nice things. But if you can go to YouTube now as well and do the same, nice comments and thumbs up and all of that, really helps, because these now have a placeholder place on YouTube. But anyway, you get them really: Patreon, Spotify, Podbean, whatever you like, wherever you get them. If you make nice noises, say nice things, thumbs ups, 5 stars, all of that, it just helps to get these noticed and hopefully to get more listeners. Any support, though, is gratefully received, and thanks for listening. I'm on all social medias: Facebook, Twitter, at Toby Haydock and at Haydock Podcasts. I have a comedy club called XS Malarkey, which is at XS Malarkey. That's good fun. As I record this, it's just celebrated its 27th birthday. And I know some of the good burgers of Patreon have come along, inspired is probably the wrong word, by these post-credit plugs, and they've had a good night, and some have even come back for more, which I'm jolly pleased about. And Joe Lycett, as I record this, has also called it the perfect comedy night on a podcast, and chose me to be his ideal compere were he to be doing a gig, an ideal gig. He chose me and another guy, dependent on where he was, James Gill in the Midlands, and me if it was in Manchester. So isn't that delightful? So yeah, come along, it's good fun. And I'm also on Instagram at toby.haydock, and I have a website, www.tobyhaydock.com. As I mentioned, I'm doing this as my other half goes out to the park to walk the dog, who was nudging away. He was going, "Arr, arr, 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 arr." So I do have to be quick, because I'm making tea this evening, which, and this is the good stuff you hang around for, because we're doing a potato reset. So everything we eat at the moment is potato. Now, unlike a lot of diets where you end up feeling quite hungry, the potato reset, you can eat as many potatoes as you like. So the thing is, you need never feel hungry, because potatoes are filling. But it's been one day and I never want to see it, and I love potatoes, and whenever I've dieted in the past, it's like, I wish I could have a potato, but potatoes they don't let you have on other. Now can't have other carbs and all that sort of thing, and I can have other veg. We can augment the potatoes with other veg. I'm making a pizza base made out of mashed potato as we speak. I know, but I have to say, at the moment, I never want to see another potato as long as I live. Let's see how we can track that across this Day of the Daleks podcast. But for now, I'm off to eat various potato surprise. We're gonna have potato à l'orange, potato with cherries, or potato surprise. Ha ha ha! God.